Charles, welcome to Wednesday. You're closing in.
Yes, sir. How are you?
As always, I think people don't necessarily realize it doesn't happen overnight, this closing in process. We've got a very special guest with us this afternoon, and I'm so pleased I could get both of you guys together. I'm speaking, of course, about Larry Klayman. Larry, can you hear us?
I can.
Very good.
Afternoon, guys.
Good to see you, Larry. And thank you, Larry, for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I think everybody wants to hear your insights and interpretations of what went on in the courtroom yesterday. You're more familiar with Judge Sullivan than certainly anybody I've spoken to. And also, a lot of people don't realize that Judge Emmett Sullivan is the same judge who's presiding over the FOIA suit that you and your colleagues at freedomwatchusa.org have brought against the special counsel's office. Can you give us some insights? What do you think was going on there yesterday?
There's been a lot of negative criticism about this judge. And I got to tell you, of any Democrat-appointed judge, he was appointed by Clinton. Before that, he was appointed to Superior Court by Bush the dad, the president, is that he's generally a very fair man. And he's not a political partisan in many senses of the world. So I think what sent him off was Flynn's lawyers playing two sides of the street. I felt like he was being dealt with in a dishonest way, because if indeed Flynn had been interrogated and not given his Miranda rights, not being told that he was being set up, that he was being entrapped, then he should never have pled guilty to anything, particularly a false statement. He should have challenged that indictment and had it thrown out. But you can't have it both ways. You know, over a year later, coming back and saying, well, maybe, even though I took this plea and they're recommending no time, suggesting that perhaps everything should be thrown out, the indictment should be thrown out. So I don't think the judge thought he was being dealt with honestly. And here's the problem, guys, is the lawyer of Michael Flynn, General Flynn, he's a good man, Michael Flynn, is Covington and Burling. That's the law. That is a Democrat law firm. That's the law firm of corrupt Attorney General under Obama, Eric Holder, corrupt head of the criminal division, Lanny Brewer, under Obama. This is the same law firm that went after Sheriff Joe Arpaio, my other client, in Arizona, claiming that he was illegally profiling Latinos. They're vicious people. They've also are the law firm that went after Roy Moore, Judge Moore down there in Alabama. They're defending cases that he brought for defamation against the women that came forward that lied about him. Right. So this is a vile law firm. And why Mike Flynn would ever have hired them, I believe that they intentionally threw him under the bus. I do believe that, honestly.
I fully agree with that statement, Larry. I was quite surprised. The first person to bring the matter to my attention was Scott Bennett, Scott is an ex-Army intelligence officer who was involved in, an investigation about terror financing. And I even asked Joe Flynn why they had selected Covington and Burling, and he didn't have an answer. I mean, it's possible that I guess people just don't know that much about law firms. There was a really interesting statement from Eric Holder back in March where he predicted that Mueller would basically charge President Trump with obstruction of justice. What can you say, Larry, from a legal standpoint about a senior level partner at the law firm that's defending General Flynn coming out in public with a statement like this? Why on earth would he do that?
Well, this is the problem when you hire these big law firms in Washington, D.C. First of all, they don't generally have the best and the brightest as lawyers. The really bright lawyers leave and start their own law firms, generally speaking. Okay. Number two, this is a Democrat law firm, Covington and Burling. It's much like what Lanny Davis is doing with Michael Cohen. Lanny Davis, really served Michael Cohen up for his own purposes. He's a close friend of the Clintons, big advocate, went to law school with the Clintons at Yale, And Michael Cohen was held out to dry by Lanny Davis and served up, and they didn't even have a cooperation agreement. And this is the nature of legal practice, particularly in Washington, D.C., where these political interests really pervade law firms. And Covington and Burling, frankly, is simply corrupt. That's the bottom line.
Well, now, the one last thing I wanted to ask you about what happened in the court yesterday, Larry. It was just 2 days before the sentencing hearing that some of these indictments were unsealed, and unlike the people who follow QAnon would like to believe, they didn't say Hillary Clinton, they didn't say John Podesta. It was two of the former business partners of Michael Flynn from his Flynn Intelligence Agency, and they're under indictment in the Eastern District of Virginia. It seemed to me that there was a lot of back and forth. Emmett Sullivan wanted to know what General Flynn's criminal exposure was in that case. It seemed to me like Judge Sullivan was trying to learn if this Eastern District of Virginia charge was somehow being held over General Flynn's head. Do you know anything about that case?
Just what I've read. I don't know anything about it. And I will say this, is that although generally speaking I have a positive view of Judge Sullivan, I was even thinking of giving him an award at some point, as I used to do at Judicial Watch for judges. I like to say good things if I can, particularly about a Democrat, because I don't have that many good things to say generally about Democrats. But, you know, he really lost it yesterday. I mean, he really, you know, he went off the reservation, and not the Indian reservation of Elizabeth Warren, I might add. But I'm sure he regrets what he did, and, you know, he didn't serve himself well. He didn't serve Michael Flynn well, and I hope that he backtracks it and makes it clear that Michael Flynn, General Flynn, is not a traitor because he did some lobbying for the government of Turkey. I wouldn't have done it. I don't think it was a good move. Probably General Flynn regrets having done lobbying for Turkey, particularly since it's a Muslim country. It's something that he generally would not otherwise do. He's been very tough on radical Islam, and Turkey's now being ruled by a guy named Erdogan, who's a lunatic, a Muslim lunatic. So, you know, he made a mistake, okay, but he's not a traitor, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, it was interesting the way it's reported versus the way it actually happened in court. And I can't understand why they don't allow video cameras in courtrooms so everybody can see and hear exactly what's said and understand the nuance, because it really started as Judge Sullivan asking if these things would rise to the level of treason, and then the federal prosecutor actually said he went and looked up the statute for treason and that this stuff didn't rise to that level. So he was asking, I mean, I felt really strongly that Judge Sullivan was kind of trying to send a message to General Flynn. I mean, he practically begged him to drop the guilty plea and was kind of shocked, it seemed to me, that General Flynn didn't do that. I personally feel like Flynn is locked in to a plea deal where someone has said to him, maybe not directly, but you need to plead guilty to this so we get the headline, Michael Flynn guilty, and if you don't do that, we got a lot of trouble for you over here in Virginia. Yeah,
you can't have it both ways. I mean, his lawyers, Flynn's lawyers at Covington and Burling, put him up there to talk out of both sides of his mouth, and that offended the judge. Frankly, it would have offended me. And excuse the French, this is bullshit. What Flynn was asked to do by his lawyers. These lawyers should have been fired right in front of Sullivan. Wow. I would have done that. And I'd fire them today to at least say, hey, to the judge, you know, I got bad legal advice. I got ineffective assistance of counsel. I'm going to get new counsel and clean this up because he was not well served.
Did the Flynn family contact you at all, Larry?
Excuse me?
Did the Flynn family contact you at all in this matter?
I've never been I can't really say what happened months ago. I do know Joe Flynn. He's a very fine man, and I can't speak for Joe, but I have had contact with him, and I suggested early on that they get other lawyers. This guy Joseph Kellner, although he claims to be Republican, he's working for a Democrat law firm run by Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer. Jeez. And so I did recommend that, and I actually gave Joe some names to give to General Flynn to hire real criminal defense lawyers that could be helpful.
I wonder if the general is being forced into using this law firm somehow. There's so much going on here that is below the surface. There's definitely more than meets the eye. Well, Larry, I know you're very busy.
Yeah, let me add one thing.
Sure.
There is a tendency, okay, in Washington in particular, to hire a big-name law firm. And that is just not a good move. You know, like I said, the really fine criminal defense law firms are small, you know, like the Black law firm in Miami and other places in this country. It's a big mistake to hire these politicized large law firms.
Can I ask one question? And I don't know if you could say anything about it, but I've noticed that our mutual friend Jerry Corsi has been on television a fair amount recently. Is there anything new that you can share with us on that matter?
Well, yes. I mean, take a look at LarryKlayman.com. CorsiNation.com is that the Senate Intelligence Committee has sent a letter saying that they want everything that he's ever written. You know, they want to see what's in his underwear, so to speak, and they want him to testify, in effect, under oath. And Jerry Corsi obviously is not inclined to do that. They can get the information from Mueller. The two heads of that committee, Chairman Richard Burr and Ranking Member Mark Warner, are like two little lovebirds. I wrote a column in WorldNet Daily yesterday about that, and you can see it at Klayman.com, LarryKlayman.com. You know, months ago I asked them to investigate, actually years ago, the wiretapping at the Trump Tower, the mass surveillance that was revealed by Edward Snowden. They just turned a blind eye on that. Burr is a anti-Trump, never-Trumper, establishment Republican. He's got a very bizarre relationship with Warner. I remember I sat in a hearing once. He had his hands all over Warner. I couldn't figure it out. And it is really strange. And the two of them are out to destroy the president, and they want to use Jerry Corsi as one of the means to do it.
So, wow. And wasn't that the committee where there was a senior staffer was having an affair with a reporter?
I don't know about that, but I do know this, is that this Republican chairman is the flip side of Mark Warner. They're like Siamese twins, and it's frightening. And, you know, rather than getting into major issues like mass surveillance on the American people without probable cause, they want to do a number on Jerry Corsi to get to the president of the United States. This is the establishment Republicans and the establishment Democrats. They work in tandem. They want the president legally dead. They want him out of office. They want to run their candidates in 2020. So anybody that's mistaken, that thinks that this is just a Democrat hit against the president, no. It's also coming from the establishment wings of the Republican Party, such as Senator Richard Burr.
What we call the Uniparty.
Right.
It is.
Well,
it is.
People should go to LarryKlayman.com and see all the information there. You can financially support Larry in his efforts to defend Dr. Corsi. You can also go to CorsiNation.com, and of course people are going to want to check out FreedomWatchUSA.org, where you can sign the petition to get Larry to be the new special counsel to investigate Mueller, and of course donate and financially support the work that Freedom Watch is doing. I think it's incredibly important, and so few people in the courtroom yesterday were aware that Freedom Watch has an ongoing FOIA lawsuit against Robert Mueller's special counsel that is undoubtedly on the mind of Judge Emmett Sullivan. He knows the special counsel's office has been slow-footing the production of documents that Judge Sullivan has ordered. He knows that those documents reveal leaking of grand jury information to the press. There, of course, was that issue the other day in the Daily Caller. Chuck Ross wrote an article where he told Dr. Corsi that it's been leaked, and that was published in the article and on Dr. Corsi's live streams and everything. So there's really a crazy array of crimes going on out of...
It is. And let me make it clear, Jason, too. You know, this Judge Emmett Sullivan is an honest man. He's a good man. Okay, he felt like he was being lied to and played with, and he overreacted. Okay, so he did the wrong thing. He's got to clean it up. But on the other hand, for a lawyer to try to play it both ways, Covington and Burling with him, that was insulting, and he took it out on General Mike Flynn.
One last question on that, Larry. Why did they switch from the original judge who was presiding over Michael Flynn's case to Emmett Sullivan? That just happened a few months ago.
Well, that's Judge Rudolph Contreras. Maybe
right.
maybe his name speaks for himself. He's one of the Democrat judges up there who I have little regard for, who frankly I don't think is an honest man. And he apparently had some involvement with Mike Flynn or some other conflict of interest, but at least at some point he took himself off. He should have taken himself off immediately, but he didn't. And when apparently things were about ready to hit the fan, he bailed out. He's the same judge that I asked to enforce a case that I brought to have Jeff Sessions conduct an internal review of the prosecutorial misconduct in Bundy through the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility and Inspector General. He bailed out of that and walked off the bench. So there's no comparison between Judge Emmett Sullivan and Rudolph Contreras. Okay, one is an honest man, the other guy, frankly, is a political hack.
Okay, but he had a conflict of interest, so there we go. Good explanation. Larry, thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day. Good luck with all these really important suits that you're dealing with here, and please send our best to Dr. Corsi. January 3rd, of course, you're going to have the first hearing in that matter in Washington, D.C., over there at 333 Constitution Avenue.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I'm confident that we've got a good judge, Judge Leon, who will listen to what we have to say about this illegal mass surveillance against Jerry Corsi and the leaks of grand jury information.
Absolutely. It's a huge topic, and thank you for being the tip of the spear on that, Larry. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, sir.
All right, Larry.
Bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye. Bye. Well, Charles, there we go. Larry Klayman from freedomwatchusa.org joining us to share some insights about General Flynn and what we can expect in that case.
A nice little holiday treat.
I like getting that kind of input from experts. I mean, you know, I've tried to make it pretty clear that I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. I don't have the truth and tell the truth. I'm looking for the truth. So I rely on experts like you and Larry and all the various guests that come on the show. I consider myself a hub of information for people to share and critique and criticize and help us all try to understand it a little better. Today, this is one of those topics, Charles, that I almost can't believe it took us this long to come up with this title, The Truman Show. Yeah. And of course, we have our friend Eric Hansen asleep at the wheel, as it were,
right.
Instead of filing those audits. He's snoozing away.
Exactly, with his alter ego mascot, False Man.
Exactly. You know, what was also funny that I should have integrated this in some way. I think the tagline from the movie was, "On the air, unaware."
That's good.
So that's very true of our friend Eric Hansen. Incidentally, this image is from a video that he recently produced that I can't help but wonder if it's not in some way intended to respond to or retaliate to some of the information that you've been bringing forward with regard to the notorious BKD.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I think you told me privately, and I think you could tell the audience possibly, that the comparison of view counts. We'll get into that a little bit. About our typical videos are now getting, within 24 hours, we're getting 10,000 plus views or thereabouts. This one got how many?
Well, Eric Hansen produced a video here. Ooh, it's very, very nicely done. I hadn't even seen this part before, but he's called to lead, which is, I guess,
modest
he's
guy.
leading the. No, wait a minute. That wasn't how I got to it before. Here it is. Eric Hansen on YouTube. He's a distinguished Eagle Scout, so that's nice. This is on. Oh, well, I guess this includes me, but he's got 33 views on this video from November 9th.
That's massive. 33? Isn't that 33, 933, the record and all that?
Yeah, well, exactly. 33 is this 9th. Yeah, it's a weird number that indicates, right, exactly. I'm always on the 33s. But yeah, unfortunately, Eric Hansen, he's got a beautifully produced video here with obviously nice cinematic lenses, and he's well lit and all that. And he's, talking about how to operate a flim-flam operation.
That's right. That's now almost, what is that? That's 5 weeks ago? November 9th, and it's got 33 views. So it's got
one person a day, almost.
Less than one person a day is watching it. He probably wakes up every morning and watches it.
It was Truman and 32 of his friends. Exactly. Well, and me. I watched it also. So.
But for the art department, I mean, this is really very good. It'll make a nice addition, perhaps, to that vaunted coffee table book when we convince the Seinfeld character Kramer to show us how it's done again.
Coffee table book that becomes a coffee table. Yeah, well, perhaps in the second version of the screensaver, I've mentioned it a few times, Charles, people who are becoming sponsors of the show by going to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth or sending a one-time sponsorship payment to paypal.me/crowdsource the truth are receiving the beautiful Sunday with Charles screensaver, and I've had nothing but a positive response. So that screensaver was a great idea. Perhaps this will be in a future one.
Great.
Yeah. Now, shall we dive into the slide program for today, Charles?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that.
So we've been actually pretty nice to BAD so far, and now
gloves are off.
The gloves are coming off today. I mean, the more I get into this, the more I realize that the financial statements of the Clinton Foundation should be shelved under not even the fiction section; it should be under the drunk fiction section of the library. I mean, they're so far away from being actual audits of the Clinton Foundation as to be laughable. And the facts are that the BKD people, Eric Hansen himself, and I doubt, maybe they have external people audit the books of BKD, maybe they probably should do that. Any serious accounting major at a community college, which are very fine places, but a community college on their second day of trying to become an accountant would be able to look at this garbage that they're passing off all across the country and around the world for what it is. It's reeking, rotting garbage. I mean, Larry was very kind. I mean, it's not even, it's not even bullshit. There's something worse than that. That's what the BKD people have put out here, and that they would allow this garbage to remain floating around the internet and all these regulators, state, federal, international, with their name on it, and not make a move to distance themselves from it, blame it on the Little Rock office, blame it on a team that's no longer there. So long as they leave this garbage out there for the new accounting firms, Price Waterhouse and Cohn Resnick and whoever else may be auditing the 2018 books, they're just increasing their ultimate liability. And I would caution the BKD people, including the shareholders of BKD, and certainly any firm that has made the mistake of selling out to BKD in exchange for paper. I mean, what a lot of these accounting firms do.
Stock.
Well, I know what they do is they'll say, all right, we'll give you, but just making up numbers now, for the Kansas City office, we'll buy that for $1.5 million, but we're only going to give you $500,000 over 3 years. And so you're taking a credit risk. You see what I'm saying? Anybody who is thinking about, who has credit exposure to BKD, should think long and hard, because with each passing day that this sleeping idiot stays as chief operating officer of BKD while also being in a conflict position as chairman of the American Institute of Certified Professional Accountants, without attempting to remedy this mess, is a day that the sleeping idiot and his friend Truman and other people are just buying themselves more liability. Because it's not like you can say, well, nobody's warning about this. I mean, beyond, this is our 128th video today. I hope we'll do a few more, and we're going to keep at this until we drive the point home here. We learned from the whistleblowers, 2 of them, that they independently have retained experts, and they come away with the same sets of general conclusions. They get at different specifics than I get at, but in very complementary ways. You don't have a defense, I don't think, and I'm not a lawyer, but you don't have a defense saying, well, I just was too busy sleeping, working on this TV show, making videos, to correct this thing. It's not like the Clinton Foundation in Little Rock, for the Little Rock office of BKD, is just, an infinitesimal little client that nobody cares about. It's probably a reference client that's been trotted out by BKD to get other business around the world. We're so good.
Got to be, right?
Right.
I mean,
well,
particularly in Arkansas, that's
right. And beyond that, BKD has a very large practice, I think disproportionately large relative to other types of accounting firms in this whole not-for-profit and government organizations area. Now we know, we just had somebody report that the first ever audit of the Defense Department has concluded that there's $21 trillion missing. So we know that, by comparison to that, I suppose this is not that bad. But and that story may or may not be true. But in the case of this one,
Catherine Austin Fitz, I think, was coming up with that number for some time, 21 trillion.
Yeah, well, again, who knows? With something like this, you just really, and that's the whole point of auditing, as I understand it. When I first started on GE back in 2006, 7, and 8, and 9, I had to get smart on what are the technical rules that accountants have to follow. And really, the toughest question that an accounting firm faces is the first one: should I do business with you? It has little to do with the quantum of the money that you might make. It has little to do with more prosaic issues. It's just, is this an entity, the Clinton Foundation? There's GE. Is this an entity that has the controls in place and the management team in place, and that is mindful enough of the rules, complying with the rules, the laws around the world? Is this an entity, a formal legal entity that I can even audit as an outsider? That's the first question. And I don't think anyone ever answered that question, or asked or answered that question properly from the very beginning. So hats off to the art department, though, for making these connections. And so now we have within BKD, no doubt, it's a big firm. I'm sure the overwhelming majority of people at BKD, I'm sure, are very honest. And but for this man Hansen and his colleagues to leave their demolished work product out there for all that's odoriferous work product, smelling like garbage, for everyone to see day after day, is absurd. And
it's like the tiger litter box.
Exactly. Worse. It's like the tiger litter box that no other tiger wants to smell. You mark your territory. I'm not going there. But so, and we will go and show you some more evidence today of why it's easy to see that this is not compliant. But we've had to come at it from lots of different perspectives. What we have out there in the audience is we have some people who like to soar up here, and they don't want to look at numbers. Numbers are difficult. Then you get the other people say, well, there are no details. And, the truth is in the middle, that the 30,000 feet above Little Rock, you can see this for what it is. It's a fraud. It's an ongoing fraud. It's the largest set of ongoing frauds in history. And you want to get into the details? Well, you have 127 other videos, not to mention multiple interviews that I've done, various formats, radio, television, alternate sites, blogs, my articles, my website, etc. There's a lot of detail out there if you want to chase the detail.
So, sorry to interrupt, Charles, but before we get into the meat of your presentation, you're speaking about the audience. There's someone in the audience who had sent us this. Can we talk about this for a quick second? The Podfather, and who is this gentleman who looks almost exactly like him?
Yeah. We could say who sent it. There's a wonderful researcher who has a site called Corey Diggs, and she does. I've had the pleasure of speaking to her a few times, and she does really deep dives into lots of different topics, and is focused on aspects of the Clinton Foundation. Has some important work that she just did that's coming out, and adding to the other recent digs, she calls them, into the Clinton Foundation. But this purports to be a photo on my left of John Podesta, also known, I think, as your friend the Podfather.
Exactly.
And I gotta say, the person on the right could be his father. It's unbelievable. But in fact, it's supposed to be one Lawrence Rockefeller of the distinguished, or the Rockefeller family. Yeah. And the resemblance is quite striking. Now, you have, with 7.5 billion people on the planet, there are a lot of matches, and then you count all this. I don't think Lawrence Rockefeller is still alive. I may have that wrong, but there are lots and lots and lots of images out there. But this one sure is striking.
Just look at the tip of his nose. It's so similar. The shape of the ears, the eyes, the shape of the chin, the face, the overall build of these men. It's a remarkable match. Even if you see a father and son, they frequently don't look that much alike.
Which is another problem, right?
Unbelievable. So that's an interesting thing. Charles, how do we find Corey Diggs.
I think if you go onto Twitter and you just punch in Corey Diggs, CoreyDigs, I think.
One word or two?
Yeah, one. It should pop up. Does it?
I'm not finding that. I think it's two G's, maybe.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
Want to help? There we go. It looks like. Well, I apologize to Corey Diggs for not having that queued up right away, but we'll be sure to alert people as to how to find Corey Diggs on Twitter.
Good.
Good find with the Podfather.
So the purpose today is to really take the audience through in some specific depth just how effed up the basic starting point for the BKD work product in 2009, why it is completely wrong. And if that's completely wrong, then all subsequent work by definition is also wrong, because that's the way accounting works. You start with a base year, 2009 being the base year for the most recent set of, in quotes, audited financial statements that are out there, and being also an important base for the set that will have to be put together for December 31st, 2018, which is now 12 days from today. So BKD has a massive problem. In my view, it has exposed, even if they've gotten representations or so-called representation letters from current and former members of the management of the Clinton Foundation that they think will give them cover to say, well, management said this was fine. We relied on management. What do you expect us to do? At a certain point, just because you can't rely on Jeffrey Dahmer that when you get this strange cooked meat that it's sirloin steak and not your younger brother that's been missing for a little while. I mean, at a certain point, you just got to do some homework here. And I'd say BKD ought to be well past that point. And if anything, I would be, if I were in the BKD camp, let's say as a partner with economic exposure, I would be saying I'm all in for suing the Clinton Foundation and the major donors and the trustees for every last penny that they ever earned or may earn in the future. So with that, maybe we could just take a quick second and remind viewers that I guess your subscriber base is continually growing now and pushing almost to 77,000, I believe, at last count.
Yeah, we're, earlier today we were at 76,900. It's probably about the same there. Oh, two people knocked off, but that's okay. There's people who are frequently telling me that they are getting inadvertently unsubscribed from the channel. So,
really?
I mean, Michael Barden told me that he was surprised to see that happen. So if you find yourself getting unsubscribed, make sure you subscribe to the Jason Goodman channel, and you can click the bell so that it alerts you. People can also subscribe, Charles, to Crowdsource the Truth 2, which is the backup channel, and that's important because in the event that malicious strikes occur or anything happens to the main Jason Goodman channel, all these shows also live stream on Crowdsource the Truth 2, and we actually have, I've implemented Super Chat on Crowdsource the Truth 2, so people who want to support the show through Super Chat can do that on Crowdsource the Truth 2.
And how many subs do you have on 2?
That's just under 10,000,
wow.
I believe. It's about 9,800 or something along those lines.
Wow.
9,680. So it'd be nice to get that over 10,000 and keep the whole train rolling.
That's really good stuff. What was that about the bell? I'm not sure what you're supposed to do.
When you subscribe on YouTube, there's a little bell icon that if you don't have it clicked, I think it doesn't notify you when a new video is posted. So you click the bell. When we go live, people get some notification in their email saying Charles is live.
Oh, okay.
And
good
then
to
they
know.
can tune in and not miss an episode.
So for the new subscribers and viewers who may not have come across us before, this is a different approach. This is not a lecture series. This is an interactive effort to try to get crowdsource subscribers and their friends engaged in a process of pushing back against the Uniparty to reestablish the equal administration of justice in this important country, the United States of America, and in a lot of countries around the world, using as a test case the Clinton Foundation. And we hear a lot of chattering from the nattering nabobs of Washington, D.C. about Donald Trump is obstructing justice. He's obstructing justice. Actually, last time I checked, it's not a crime, and again, I'm not trying to practice law, but I don't believe it's a crime to obstruct injustice.
Right.
Which is, I think, what Donald Trump needs to do more of. He needs to take out, I don't know what size shoes he was wearing, but he needs to go into his one of his many golf clubs, make sure that whoever works behind the service department in wherever he keeps his golf cleats has sharpened those golf cleats to do it fairly well.
Step on somebody,
and he needs to put on some really big, special pairs of golf shoes and start stomping on these people, because we've got to obstruct the injustice. When we hear what's going on with Jerry Corsi, we watch what's going on with Michael Flynn, we read about the dual approaches. You're going to raid Paul Manafort and his wife right before Thanksgiving or whenever it was at 4 o'clock in the morning and scare the living crap out of the family, but you're going to allow Cruella de Vil Clinton to get together with Cheryl Mills and her other co-conspirators and have a Chardonnay expose as Peter Strzok pretends to interview them, not under oath, and you'll get dopey James Comey to say, no credible prosecutor would ever go after the largest unprosecuted set of frauds and public corruption because they're all Democrats and they're all working for the Clintons. I mean, the double standard there is just so awful that, it has... I got into this process before the Clinton Foundation, but this idea of restoring order, restoring the rule of law, making sure that companies as big, I got into this with General Electric, as big as GE with all of their resources actually play by the rules in the United States and in every important country, so that investors know that when they're thinking about making an investment decision in GE, they're doing it on the basis of real information, not fiction. And equally now with the Clinton Foundation, it should not be an open secret that if you want to get a gigantic contract out of the Hillary Clinton administration, just give them a bone, throw me a bone, give them $10 million and you get back $100 million. We can't remain on this path that we've been on for so many years here under Republicans and Democrats alike. And this Clinton Foundation is a place to really draw a meaningful line in the sand and work together as a group, and we're starting to see a lot of that. I'm getting a lot of chatter back, positive help from email and other ways from people who want to come in and make their voices be counted. And for that, I'm grateful to you, Jason, for organizing Crowdsource the Truth. I think it was a visionary approach.
Thank you.
And what we try to do here is share with each of you facts that we deem to be important. So we give you basic tools that you can use and you can consider. That's why we provide these slides with the links that you can pull down, and yourselves, you can see the primary sources that we're trying to use here. Jason has done a fantastic job with this playlist. I don't know if we can pull that one up.
Oops.
Yeah. But here we have just the playlist alone, not the underlying videos, but just the playlist alone has almost 15,000 views of the table of contents.
Wow.
And this is our 128th video. We try, it's such a big story that, and the topic is reasonably complex, that we felt it was a good idea to break it into digestible bits and pieces, and then also to try to link it to the progress of what's going on in this effort to restore justice in the United States of America. So we try to tie it into breaking current developments, give you a sense of how we view those developments, and then pick and expound upon a central facet of this unprosecuted fraud so that you see for yourselves what we're talking about. And I really, in the past I've tried to focus on the older ones so people could take a look at those, and then the middle ones, and then the more recent ones. There really are a large number of these.
Yeah.
And when you look at them all together, I know I once had a collection of antique maps, actually, of the 15th, 16th, 17th century antique maps. I had about the same number, 128, 130 of them, all framed beautifully, museum quality. And I was in an office where they didn't have any art for the place, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, you pay the insurance on this, and I'll just let you put some of my, like 70 of them, up in an office. And when you put them, all of those movie posters together in such a format, or select the 50 best or the 30 best or whatever in a room, it really, and maybe you have like a museum inscription on the side, the reason we did this was, or what you should focus on is this, and the date. Huh. It's quite interesting, actually. It makes it, in the case I was just referring to with the office, we had I was working for a very large Japanese bank back in 1991, said, you know what, why don't we take 3 guys and we'll give you $50 million and let's see what you can do with it. And and they insisted that we have, we travel first class and we do all. They wanted to try to.
They insist.
No, it was foolish actually. I mean, I was in my early 30s, and during the Gulf War, when no one was flying, I once was on the Concorde with like 2 other people.
Wow.
And I wasn't complaining about it, but.
That's a hell of a carbon footprint.
Exactly. Right, and so we move into this office at 48th and Park on the 5th floor, and it was, I don't know, 15,000 square feet or something like that.
It's big.
And the walls were all blank. And so then we put my maps up, get an actual museum person to come in and install them properly. Because you have to be careful with these older documents.
If it falls off the wall.
Well, it's more like you want to make sure it's not getting too much of the wrong type of light. And
there's a lot of considerations.
Right, so they did it all properly, and it took them several days to do it right. And then the next week, guests would come in, and their immediate reaction would be, "Boy, how many decades have you been in this office?" About one day.
That's funny. So they were all framed, Charles.
Oh yeah.
Just like the subjects of Robert Mueller's investigation. That's interesting.
So with that, I suppose, why don't we jump into just a quick update on the most recent news. This first article in the Wall Street Journal, of course, which I know how much you love the Wall Street Journal.
Well, it's good if you want some interesting fiction to read.
Or if you've got birds or cats.
Exactly.
But, this one here, again, the degree to which the Washington, D.C. group, and I think this is that guy, Byron, what's his name? Below, if you go down, the author, Byron, Tao. That's Shelby's boss.
Oh.
So this is the D.C. team.
That's the guy.
That's the guy, exactly. This is the D.C. team, and with Larry's helpful explanation that maybe Covington and Burling was brought in here to do the dirty on Mr.
No doubt.
General Flynn here, and these guys, particularly somebody like a General Flynn, if you grow up in that environment where there is a big hierarchy and you're at the top of the hierarchy and you're used to, if you need resources, you ask for 10x because you really want 1x and you get 10x, and you grow up that way, but you don't have a lot of experience with the law. You can make some really stupid decisions. I mean, even Jared Kushner, who is supposedly pretty smart, he apparently hired Jamie Gorelick and Wilmer Hale to help him with his background, navigating his background check. And I mean, that's just asinine.
I find it so difficult to believe that these guys are totally clueless, Charles. I mean, as you said, they're supposed to be smart guys. All they would need to do is turn on Crowdsource the Truth to learn all this stuff. But so Larry told us that he had communicated with the Flynn family not to use Covington and Burling. I wonder to what extent it's not a choice, and that he's being forced to do this, and that some elements of what we see in that courtroom, etc., are a public stage play. Like, that would explain why the judge is feeling confused. Whenever somebody proceeds in a way that totally defies logic, and they're not like crazy, stupid, or like drunk, I always wonder what is motivating this person.
Well, the way I would think about it is almost the same as to say that when it just doesn't really make sense, and you're talking about somebody with a fine reputation of mind doing things that don't make sense, there's at least one reason behind it, and you just don't know it yet, and that's really the issue.
Yeah.
So this this is hysterical. The second link. There's a show, a radio show out there in Little Rock, and this guy Doc Washburn. I don't know how long this. If we could tell how long this thing. Yeah, there's a 2 hour and 28-minute thing talking about the Larry Doyle and Badass Moynihan there, and apparently it's quite entertaining.
So who is this Doc Washburn?
It's some radio host in Little Rock, and he did a program on this thing, but it's I don't know how many views. This is not getting that many views, only 622. But it's a long thing, 2 hours and 28 minutes. So when you look at this...
Who has time to sit and listen to that, Charles?
Right, but similarly, I mean, when you look at our numbers, that gives you a testament. This is a guy who's paid to do this, has got resources behind him, and he's been doing it for a while.
Well, you know what? I guess his listeners are probably on KARN, and then this is just the SoundCloud backup, so this might not be his primary venue for listenership.
Could be. But anyway,
interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, and actually, the two gentlemen, they really did get a lot of attention, and even internet memes going. You know, Larry was asked. Both these people are special individuals. They met in college, Holy Cross. There's Tom Fitton behind him, and there was one person in one shot eating something behind Larry.
This person?
No, it was a guy in at a different point in the hearing.
But the room was virtually empty, other than the two speakers, their legal team, Tom Fitton, a smattering. I mean, like maybe 4 reporters and me. I couldn't believe how empty the room was.
Yeah, what were all those other people doing there? I mean, you had Crowdsource the Truth there. You didn't need any other help, right?
I guess, I don't know.
But the comments on each of them were hysterical, both during and then after. You know more than I did about creating these internet memes, but they had Moynihan up there in the internet on Twitter with the word badass. And Larry with the word, because he was asked, can you give me a specific example of this public corruption, pay to play? And he waited for a second, and Larry has a bit of a Massachusetts accent, and he said,
a little bit.
Yeah, Mozambique. And so that, articulating the beak.
Yeah, both of them had pretty strong Boston accents, which are, I don't know, I always get a kick out of a Boston accent.
They're pretty funny. Both of them are really, in real life, they're very funny, and, I was they give me grief, and I give them grief. I met them a couple years ago. And I'm particularly close to Larry because he's here in the general area. The other guy is in Massachusetts. But we were joking about the accents, and without missing a beat, one of them said, "It's very simple. We're massholes." I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of hay being made about the Trump Foundation.
Right.
And let's hit this. I want to spend a little time on this baby here. If we look at the lawsuit here, if we hit this link. There's the original lawsuit, okay? And if you just stop right there, this is a lawsuit to get, in theory, $2.8 million back.
Oh.
Right? $2.8 million. Now,
oh my God.
The Clinton Foundation, we've said, I mean...
Why doesn't Trump just write a check for that?
Well, but the issue is, delete that M and put the B in there.
Right.
Okay, and we're talking about...
1,000 times.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is, I'm not trying to say that, if these infractions did occur and are proven and admitted, okay, then penalties obviously should be paid. But if they're as serious as the Attorney General of the state of New York claims, then these same infractions, are far more serious in the case of the Clinton Foundation, as we are going to explain. You just stick that. Try not to remember the number 2.8 million, because we're going to be spending some time on numbers, and I'm going to be asking you some really tough questions, Jason, like, is 10 million more than 2.8 million? We're going to go through that. Yeah, exactly. I need a calculator.
Well, see, the other thing that comes to mind immediately, Charles, when I look at this is that, 2.8 million, I mean, I've heard whispers that the Trump kids or the family or whatever use this foundation maybe inappropriately to pay for travel or personal stuff or whatever. But 2.8 million, I mean, that sounds to me like some fancy people over a couple of years paying for a bunch of first-class plane tickets and hotels. And, like, that's a bill that a couple of people in a large family could run up with extravagant spending and you could account for it. Buy a car, buy a painting of Donald Trump or whatever. 2.8 billion could finance weapons deals and private armies in foreign countries, and that's what really the meat of it is. The fact that the Clinton Foundation is 1,000 times the dollar amount is just one thing.
Right.
What was that money used for seems to be the bigger question.
Well, again, you see, there are important differences between the Trump Foundation legal structure and the Clinton Foundation legal structure. Mm-hmm. I would say that a foundation that names itself after a celebrity it's a vanity exercise in part. What you're trying to do is let the world know that you're generous and you burnish your credentials. And I am aware of certain charities that explicitly go out of their way to hide who the true benefactors are, because the benefactors do not want to be noticed, and they want to do this. It's really, actually, I think, an ancient Jewish tradition that you're not supposed to, when you give money away from charity, you're not supposed to say, and you're certainly not supposed to take credit, and you're not supposed to let the beneficiary know who gave the money.
Right.
Otherwise, it's
not a mitzvah.
That's what I was to say, mitzvah. So now we have the expert here, mitzvah.
Also, somebody has told us in the comments here that it's a Worcester accent, not a.
Oh,
Worcester. How do you pronounce that?
Worcester.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done. Well done. Whoever got that. But that's in the case of one of them, and that would be.
I think they're saying it's Larry Doyle.
No, that's wrong. It's the other one.
Mr. Moynihan.
Yeah, because.
Oh yeah, no. This is Mrs. Miggins says Moynihan has a Worcester mass. Worcester. She even puts it there.
Well done.
Yeah, not Bostonian.
I wonder if she is from Worcester.
Worcester. Everybody's writing Worcester now in the comments. So that's good.
But just staying on the differences. So the Trump Foundation is what's called a private foundation. That's where, I get together with my family and we say what we're going to do is we're just going to make grants to other public charities that are worthy. And we're not going to actually try to set up an initiative to do anything. We're just going to find organizations that are validly organized and operated lawfully around the world and give them grants and hope that money ends up serving the purposes that we'd like to serve. And that's fine and dandy to do that. You're not supposed to set up a private foundation to, let's say you've got a ne'er-do-well nephew or something like that and is screwing up in life. You're not supposed to use that foundation to maybe pay that person a salary they shouldn't get, or have them travel around or keep them out of trouble or whatever. You're not supposed to do that to create an office for yourself or for your family. You really do have to use it for charity. And it's bad to abuse such an entity. We've been speaking about the Gates Foundation, and we will continue to make the case that the Gates Foundation should be shut down. We have.
Frankly, Microsoft should be shut down. Windows is terrible.
Right. But in the case of the Gates Foundation, it's one thing to say when you have no government debt outstanding and no pension problems around the various states in the United States that these billionaires who create fortunes through monopolistic or near monopolistic practices get, when they become slightly older, the right to convert that bad record into a good reputation by announcing they're going to give some of their stock away.
And vaccines that do who knows what.
Right, and run the thing in a way that really is just trying to buy off corruptible politicians like the Clintons and others so that you could continue your monopolistic practices. I mean, we're at a moment now with the total amount of debt outstanding where we can't let that continue to happen. So I think that the Trump Foundation matter with the New York AG is not good for them. But in this effort, we could take the very obvious argument, just say, you know what, New York AG, you're absolutely right about Trump. Now on to Clinton.
Well,
right about Trump, on to Clinton.
It's interesting to see how, like, Eleanor Holmes Norton and other possibly insane people are very quick to say, oh, well, they're out of office, Trump is in office, let's focus on people who are in office. It's like, well, why the hell weren't you? I mean, right,
back in 97 through 2013, why weren't you focused on the Clinton Foundation?
When she was there as the Secretary of State. And also it's like, that crime occurred a few years ago, right. Forget it.
Yeah. But then we get this fellow, what's his name, Mnuchin or whatever, I think that's...
Is it?
This is Joe Conason. Now, I like Joe Conason's writing. I think his writing is actually, he's a gifted writer. I think his analysis is foolish, but his writing style, I think, is pretty good, just what I would say. And he is an award-winning writer. He's been around doing that for a long time. He's a close friend of the Clintons.
Why is it foolish?
Because he's trying to make the case that the situation at the Trump Foundation is a racketeering enterprise far worse than the glorious Clinton Foundation that's been doing everything wonderfully well. He wrote a book called Man of the World, Joe Coniston, where he praised the Clinton Foundation. He's trying to say that the Donald J. Trump Foundation is a racketeering enterprise by comparison. So he just doesn't really seem to, he's got a screw loose, Coniston. He just doesn't, the Clinton fraud detection gene pool is just not resident in his brain. And
perhaps he's deliberately trying to force this narrative.
Oh, no doubt. And he doesn't have any sense. A lot of gifted writers oftentimes have no clue about numbers. And, on the one hand, you're talking about 2.8 million at the Trump Foundation. If it's true, what's alleged is true, it is a problem. And there should be fines and penalties, and so it's going to be shut down. That's exactly what the Clinton Foundation should be done.
But even if it was
down.
a 10x penalty, Trump could just write a check for $30 million, give the money back to whoever has been wronged, and it's done.
No, with this kind of stuff, it goes out of your hands if it becomes a criminal matter. Huh. So, no, actually.
So is Trump liable for crimes?
I don't know the specifics of that case. And again, to the audience who wants me to jump and look at everything that's happens to relate to Trump, I focus on large, complex frauds. I took a concession to look at the Clinton Foundation of $3.2 billion because I was focused on the $900 billion at the time fraud.
Wow.
With GE. So for me, $3 billion is pretty small to focus on by way of these types of problems. And I'm not going to now go into 2.8 million, but in depth. Now, there's been limited coverage away from this Trump stuff. Now, I don't know, actually, should we jump into that Energizer Bunny one?
Is that
the Hill story
yeah.
That's just in? Yeah. This guy, Craig Manoussian, he tweeted out, if you go down this page a little bit here, below this, there's a tweet where he tweets out this idiot. Meanwhile, some news about the Clinton Foundation today suggesting that it's the Energizer Bunny, whereas the Trump Foundation is a dud. Now, Manoussian, I guess is his name, well named. Delete a few letters in his last name. But anyway.
Well, isn't it stupid of him to make a reference to the Energizer Bunny? Has he not heard about this?
I guess not. He tried to forget about this. This is
one you're being the Energizer, right?
Too cute by half, exactly. And this is the same gentleman who sent letters around to people in the media trying to discredit me last week, including to the Washington Post.
Oh, really?
Where he alleged that, for years I have been making demonstrably false allegations about the Clinton Foundation. It's a guy who just basically doesn't. He enjoys the drunk history fiction section of the local library, or of Kindle or whatever.
Uh-huh. But did he demonstrate any of these demonstrably false?
No, of course, because they can't.
Right. So that's idiotic when people make claims and say, oh, there's evidence, but they don't show the evidence, or they just make up evidence.
Yeah. And here, our work continues to help. 901,000 children's books get distributed. No authority
written by Chelsea.
Yeah, no authority for that. 26 million U.S. children have healthier food choices. Not authorized for that. 160,000 farmers improve their livelihoods. No authorization for that. So thanks for confessing to charity fraud with us, because this is yet another set of arguments that you're trying to take credit and virtue signal for work where the Clinton Foundation has no legal authority to solicit this type of funding. So thanks, Craig. You're one hell of a genius.
It's really an indicator how little attention is paid to these charity frauds, because this is not the first instance I can think of where someone has brazenly admitted in a public filing of some sort to engaging in charity fraud. Robert David Steele. Sorry.
Speaking of the Steele dossier. If we go then to this RT hit, and I know how that's going to make certain heads explode. Yeah. This was actually sent to me by several people. Fabienne sent it to me. Marty Seif, who's now with Sputnik, but previously was, I think, the Foreign affairs editor for the Washington Times. Here we have Michael Isikoff.
Oh, yeah.
Claiming that he believes basically that the Steele dossier is fundamentally false. And he's the guy who popularized it, created all the media interest in it right at the election time.
How does he reconcile that?
I guess he doesn't have to live with himself. But I mean, the point here is that when one is talking, it's the Clinton modus operandi and now the Comey, jerk Comey, modus operandi. If you've got an enemy, what you do is you accuse the enemy of doing what you in fact are doing and hope that people are not smart enough to see your gaslighting approach for what it is. I mean, it's the Clintons who were colluding with a foreign national, Christopher Steele, who then was using money provided by whoever gave the money to him to go out and purchase, fraudulent evidence from Russians that could be packed into this piece of garbage dossier that was then accepted with no skepticism of any kind and used to ultimately power up first Crossfire Hurricane and then the Mueller investigation. And now you have this guy Isikoff saying, you know what, this is all garbage, what I did, and Steele backing away from it, and yet gung-ho. We got gung-ho with the Mueller investigation. Somebody was telling me, actually, I did a hit yesterday at RT on this subject, and a great guy there, Caleb Mopin, who I keep forgetting to tell you would love to come on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. And
he's a really good guy. He was explaining that apparently even NPR is backing away from the Steele memo. When that happens, that's something. For NPR to now say there's really nothing to the Russian collusion
But
delusion.
there's so much damage that's been done by this already. Like a lot of people, we were talking about the possibility that Flynn would be cleared yesterday, and that would be good. But yet we've still had 2 years of a country without the benefit of someone with Michael Flynn's experience and knowledge helping us. It really is disgusting how this effort has expended so much energy, so much money, so much time just to destroy people. If we would work to help benefit each other and build the country up, think of how much better we'd be.
And you think back about what people are pining for, the old Obama days. Think of the Nimrods who were in our foreign policy establishment, starting with Hillary Clinton, and then Lurch, John Kerry, and Samantha Power, and Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, and all those people spying on all the journalists, using the deep state against journalists across the political spectrum. That's what you're hoping for, so we can go back and give another $150 billion to the Iranians, allow nations across the Middle East to fall, refugees stream in here, another legal war in Libya and Syria. That's what you really think you're missing? And you expect to be taken credibly today? I mean, it's nuts. So if we hit this, this is an interesting one. January 4th, 2018, Chuck Grassley, I think, is leaving the post as chair of the Judiciary Committee, I believe, in the next year, and it will be followed by Lindsey Graham. But here's a detailed set of questions to the rat and his subordinate, Mr. Wray. If you go to the very top of the page, it tells you how many, you put the cursor up there at the top, I'll tell you how, it's a 10-page letter asking all sorts of tough questions. But we need to remember, at the root of this inquiry was the original questions that Grassley had about what in the hell was Huma Abedin doing with 4 jobs? Why did she have 4 jobs starting in June of 2012? How does that all fold into Benghazi? How does that fold into the Clinton Foundation and Teneo and the Clintons personally and the email? It's all, very crucially important. How did Huma Abedin get a security clearance? How did John Brennan, for that matter, get a security clearance? Could Barack Obama have gotten a security clearance had he not been president? And what about the other people who got variances to serve in our foreign policy establishment under that president? I mean, this is a very important set of subjects that I think the deep state is doing its level best to obstruct any real inquiry. And one of the real problems, I think, in the way this whole transition happens is that holdovers from the Obama administration, I think, are very much still involved vetting anybody who might want a top security clearance.
I think you got holdovers from the Bush administration running special counsel offices. So they're just pulling out all the stops, doing everything they can. I'm convinced that Michael Flynn was somehow forced to be represented by Covington and Burling, and he's like a guy with his hands tied being dragged through the water.
Right, exactly. Now, meanwhile, just a few quick comments on the current state of affairs. If we hit the Zero Hedge link here, Christopher Whalen is somebody I've come to know over the years. He's a very smart guy. He's done a lot of work. I think he worked at the Fed for a while. He's more interested in the debt markets than the equity markets. But he's right to point out that, as I just did actually on I-24 News, that we've had a 10-year experiment with deficit spending and keeping interest rates on the floor. And I would argue that long experiment, which it's not fair to blame on Obama because he inherited a mess from W. Bush, and perhaps W. inherited a mess from Clinton, and Clinton inherited a mess to a certain extent from H.W. But we have a real set of problems on our hands. It's like you promote people, let's say, from senior year in high school, and you say, all right, even though you're a horrible student, we're going to put you in we want to put you in the electrical engineering program at MIT.
Oops.
See
how you'll perform.
See how you'll do. And then we say, the good news is, Jason, for you and everybody, you don't have to, I can take those out. You don't have to worry about your grades because it's going to be automatic pass.
Wow. I wonder how the electrical engineering out of that department will fare.
And then what happens is that, those graduates then end up working at Tesla, which had, today a car that spontaneously burnt twice.
Whoa. What do you mean twice? I didn't hear about that.
It's on Zero Hedge today. I mean, so you end up, when you change, you lower the standards and you say, in anything, if it's sports, if it's entertainment, if you take me, my dear departed mom was determined when I was a young child that I was going to be a musician just like her. And, for the life of me, I cannot, when you take a piano player, somebody who's really good at it, they can, use both hands at once and they don't worry about this one's doing this and that one. And I just couldn't get any of that right, the cadence, the time. I mean, I couldn't read music that well. And,
wow.
And she'd have to sit there listening to me practice, and it would be, like horrible sounds. And all of a sudden, like in 4th or 5th grade, after years of this, she came in one day and she said, you know what?
You're done.
You're never going to be a musician.
Oh.
I was like, okay, great. Does that mean I'm out of art too? Yep, you're out of art too. Anyway, so similarly, if you lower the standards, as people have done here, you end up with this approach here of low interest rates, massive deficit spending. Nobody cares about the debt under Obama, but all of a sudden now we care about it under Trump. When he's only added $1 trillion, maybe $2 trillion of debt. Obama added 10, 12 trillion of debt. And now people are instantly concerned about the impact that rising interest rates are going to have on Trump's debt. Forgetting about Obama's debt and our collective debt here. So this is shaping up as a rough 2019.
Oh boy!
Now, yesterday, if we just hit, I was on with Queen Utrice Lead, and it was a lot of fun. Again, you see here, this is about an hour, only 257 downloads of this thing. But I believe Progressive Radio Network, I think, is the leading progressive radio operation globally. It only has 1 million downloads. Look at this. And this has been around for a long time.
Wow.
So to put your metrics in perspective that you're achieving with Crowdsource the Truth, this is really something. And this is not, this is not right-wing media. This is progressive. Utrice used to be station manager of WBAI. She's a wonderful lady, and we get along on issues of corruption, deep state surveillance, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bushes. We get along on a lot of things. Some economic issues we disagree, but she's very thoughtful. And the audience, I think I'm scheduled to, my next thing with them is to do a question and answer, which I love doing because the questions are basically pretty hostile. And I enjoy trying to field them. Now, they're very respectful but hostile. Some are silly.
Why, because these are all Clinton fans?
No. Most of them hate Clinton. These are people who are, hard left. Some of them are not all that wild about, not that concerned about the Chinese embracing full-on communism. I mean,
wow.
But nonetheless, they're very respectful. I've done a ton of interviews with her, and I look forward to it. And then I also have done, I think, with Katerina Blainova, almost 70 interviews. And the approach that we have been doing, this is since May of 2016, she sends, so the Dow just dropped even more.
Where was that?
Up here, Dow dives to the lowest point in 2018 after Fed rate hike.
Oh, wasn't Trump telling the Fed not to hike the rate?
Yeah, again.
So they're working against him.
I don't think they are, actually. I think, as I was saying earlier today on the Israeli channel, I mean, we have a long overdue structural correction that needs to take place. You cannot take somebody and say, that you want to run a marathon, right? And the only problem is you're 250 pounds overweight, and you're going to do this in Arizona in the summer. I mean, it's just it doesn't make sense
Heart
to do that.
Heart attack in the first 5 minutes.
Exactly. What you might consider doing is trying to lose at least maybe 225 of those 250 pounds, and maybe then you could think of. Similarly, when you have an economy that has a government sector spending $6 trillion a year to, a lot of it wasted, too much of it wasted, and you have an infrastructure that is overbuilt in places where nobody's ever going to hire because the cost of doing business is so high, and you have commitments to programs that are ineffective and don't make sense. You don't have a national consensus on how to fight whatever wars need to be fought and what constitutes victory. You're going to be spending a lot of time and wasting trillions and trillions of dollars trying to fix things and only hurting yourself. And so the Sputnik people, I've had some news-related interviews, but the overwhelming majority of my time with them have been with Katerina Blainova and, to a lesser extent, Marty Seif, who are more opinion contributors. And so I commend to the viewership. I mean, Katerina takes my attempted answers and then weaves a lot more in and provides context. And I think the stories are fun to read at the time and then in retrospect. Here is just a brief update from our friend in Canada. The mystery of the Barry and Honey Sherman and their deaths now being classified as murders has still not been solved a year later. And I hope that investigators will get to the bottom of this.
David Hawkins is very interested in this, and we were looking at this article earlier today, talking about how the Sherman's son kicked out.
Right, that's this article.
This guy, yeah, and I wonder what that means. Has the young Mr. Sherman discovered something about Jack Kay that would somehow cause him to abruptly fire him?
Yeah, I don't know. But again, this is a matter, I'm not a professional homicide investigator, but there are too many of these type of stories wrapped around the Clinton saga, and I think we need to really get to the bottom of it. Now, this also is final, reasonably funny thing. Did you see this story in the New York Post yesterday?
The Post is great. Witches are offended by Trump calling the Russia probe a witch hunt. I wonder if that will cost him the witch vote. It's like Hillary Clinton and her friends. Yeah, who are the witches?
Pretty sure he doesn't have much of the witch vote.
Doesn't look too worried about it.
As of yet, yeah. That's pretty amusing.
It's a nice tux.
Anyway, so now let's jump into some of the substantive matters of the Clinton Foundation.
Indeed.
Now, this is an old slide, which we did in October of 2017. Oh, sorry, 2018. And it's important to understand here that the folks at BKD, it's not like that there's special BKD rules of accounting. And here's Eric Hansen, probably definitely sleeping at this point, in the middle of a nightmare, a real-life nightmare. All accountants in the United States are required, just as a matter of their profession, to ensure that the books and records of something that purports to be a charity actually followed, at the time, this SF Statement of Financial Accounting Standards 117, which I think has subsequently been modified. But with respect to the work that was pumped out in 2009, which we're going to be focusing on today, you absolutely had to understand and track a foundation like this to make sure that it was indeed a foundation, which I would argue in 2008 and 9 it wasn't. It was a club of the Clinton crime family. It was a collection of financial accounts that nobody really monitored all that carefully. In real life, what you have to do is, if money was given to this thing for an endowment, you had to make sure that you actually had a foundation and you were in compliance with every state, federal, and foreign law. So they fail that. Let's assume they could pass it. If they could have passed it, they would have had to say, well, this money over here was supposed to go for the endowment, and you can't put it all together like it's your personal living and say, I'm going to put in my savings account money for a house and money for grandchildren and money for children and whatever, and then if I need a little bit of money one month when I'm light, steal some from the endowment, I'll always put it back. You can't do that with a charity. And if you have money that's segregated, that's to be used, let's say next year, temporarily restricted, you can't evade that. You can't go to a bank and say, see this money over here? I can't use it till next year. Give me a credit line. You're not allowed to do that. And then unrestricted net assets, that's your free money. It's not really unencumbered, as we talked about before.
Right.
That's stuff that has to be devoted solely to the authorized purposes of the foundation. It's not unrestricted in the sense that if you want to pay off a mistress, you can do that. No, it's only to be focused on this Little Rock complex, holding the presidential papers, and operating a research facility. That's all you can use it for, right? And then when it comes to this question of, right, what are the most important expense items? They're called program services, okay? Those services are the major purpose for and the major output of the organization and often relate to several major programs. So if you're going to track any expenses, you have to track them all. And if you're, Falsman the Tiger in the accounting firm, you really should be focused, once you get past this issue of is it actually a foundation, again, we're in the alternative universe where Hillary Clinton's president now, saying that this thing is a mess, but we're going to audit it anyway. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to figure out, okay, what were the programs? I mean, I was supposed to raise money to build this complex. I told everybody, I told the building permit people in the city of Little Rock it was going to cost $86 million or whatever the number was. I told the city of Little Rock in the lease that I'd spend at least $100 million on this. If time has passed and you're what do you call that thing? The time phone hack? If you're in 2009 now, 5 years after you finished the complex, you should be asking yourself, if all I said I was going to do was raise $100 million to build this complex and then give it, the bulk of it, to the National Archives so they would shoulder the expense of running it, why do I need to raise more money? I finished what I said I was going to do.
IMAX theater.
Exactly. So, and then down here for the people, if we just go a little bit down the page, Jason.
Yeah.
This first part is from SFAS, and this is from the Articles of Incorporation. Lifted language from the Articles of Incorporation. We've shown you how to get that before. But it says, provided that such use be exclusively and irrevocably applied to the exempt purposes of the corporation. The only thing that they can do is, the purpose, this green stuff, the purposes, or black stuff, the purposes for which the corporation is organized are to establish and support a presidential archival depository, as it is strictly defined by statute, to house a bunch of stuff in Little Rock. That's it. That's all you're supposed to do. Okay? Now maybe BAD, maybe Hansen was too busy doing videos and going to football games in University of Mizzou and expanding his stuffed animal collection to really bother to read the most important document that relates to the Clinton Foundation, which is its Articles of Incorporation. But had he done that, he should have realized, the BKD team should have realized long before they started issuing, purported audits beginning in 2002 in March, before they were licensed in the state, I might add, of Arkansas, that admitted in these audits, we are using, the trustees have basically directed us to use accounting principles that we're not allowed to use in the United States of America.
It's just so absurd on the face of it. It's I wonder if Eric Hansen is thinking, does this tiger suit make me look fat?
Exactly. So let's spend, for those new viewers, let's go into this New York State site. which is really key.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, exactly.
This is such a useful way to find out who's not registered with the New York State Bureau of Charities.
Right, so if we go into that EIN line and punch in 31, then 158, 0204, and then hit search in the bottom there, and then you'll get to a page down on the lower left. Eventually,
yeah, it's slow.
Yeah, this is a very useful site, and for those who are watching and have an interest, particularly you investigators out there, we're going to have a page that we put in here of a bunch of EINs you can check. Here you get to the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. And if we go down this landing page, let's slowly keep going down. Let's look. Annual filing for charitable organizations. Do we see a line here, fiscal year end, December 31st, 17? No. That means they haven't filed in New York for 17 yet. The filing deadline was November 15th, 2018.
Oh, yes, of course.
Unless it's in process, which is possible. They haven't apparently met the deadline, which is against the law.
How long would it take? I mean, November 15th were over a month ago.
Well, because they're very busy going after the Trump Foundation, probably, and they've got the team,
but
churning
a month
out.
Seems like a long time from the time you send something until it shows up here, right?
Well, especially because there's a pressing public interest in making sure that you understand whether the Clinton Foundation is in fact complying with the law. So if we go down a little bit here, here's the 2009 link. Okay, this is the filing for 2009 in New York.
This one?
Yep. And it'll punch up in the left, right behind Donald. It's ready. If you hit Donald out of the way, now he's back in there. Okay, if we go to page 84.
This looks like a Robert Mueller indictment.
Yeah. If on the right-hand side, there's that little thing, just whack it all the way down to the very end. You see that?
Yeah. This is one thing that I would like to punch Tim Cook in the mouth over. There we go.
Only one? Okay. Can we rotate that, or is that impossible?
Yes, we can. Nothing is impossible, Charles.
There we go. All right. So this is the so-called combining statement of activities for the William J. Clinton Foundation for 2009. Okay? This document is purposefully, in my opinion, omitted from the Clinton Foundation website. Right? They don't want you to see this because this is a confession of fraud. Okay? And we're going to show you exactly why this is a confession of fraud. But I wanted you to have in the audience the ability to follow just what we did. There's also, if we go to the preceding page 83, which I hope we can keep in this format, you have the balance sheet, which also is a confession of fraud. Now, these documents are available via New York State in the 2008 package and the 2007 package. They were purposefully omitted from the main Clinton Foundation website. Again, because if you understand what you're doing, you look at this and you say, wait a minute. They weren't authorized. They don't tell you what the foundation actually is. They never got anything done for climate. CHI is a fiction. CHDI was never registered. CGSGI was never registered. And there should be consolidating entries, and they're not. And by the way, this says combining, not consolidated. So that doesn't meet the technical standard for
4 stars.
So it's like, 4-star Charity Navigator, 4 hemp stars.
Fraud Navigator.
4 hemp brownies.
It's in the top 0.001% on Fraud Navigator.
Yeah. So if we now jump back into the slide, the geniuses at BAD this is lifted from their audit. Okay, this is language from their audit. Management basically gives you a first draft of an audit, and then the BKD, of the language of the audit, the BKD normally would take that language and they would force management to represent in a formal letter that this is true, all this. Yes, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, and that there should be a capital T, not lowercase, was formed in October 1997 to design, construct, and initially endow a presidential archival depository, right? But no, since the completion of the library in 2004, there is no such thing as a mission different than your authorized purposes. You can't say, I'm Christopher Columbus and I'm going to discover the new world, and instead, go down to South Africa and go on a big game safari. You can't do that. Your mission was to stay in Little Rock,
get paid,
and build the damn library and make sure that all the presidential records of Bill Clinton's 2 terms are in that library. And last I checked, Little Rock's a relatively small place. You don't need to get in a helicopter and go from one portion of Little Rock to another and rent private planes and fly around the world and have multiple offices and hire all these different people if the National Archives staff is going to be taking care of these presidential records anyway at their expense. So, I mean, this is what you were supposed to do, and then here they confess to fraud. They say, actually what we're doing to think about this language, to strengthen the capacity of people in the United States and throughout the world to meet the challenges of global interdependence. What in the F does that sentence mean? Okay, that's not a charitable purpose. To meet the challenges of global interdependence. Okay, that's just not a charitable purpose as stated. Overly broad, has nothing to do with what they say in the legal documents they're supposed to do. And then if you're going to advance that mission by economic empowerment, is that the same as hiring the Clinton family for a speech, hiring dopey Chelsea Clinton to go work at NBC for absurdly high compensation? I mean, the economic empowerment has nothing to do with charity.
It's just giving people cash.
Right, and climate change may or may not be something that should be served by a charitable purpose, but on its own, there are plenty of people selling, to reduce CO2, they're selling, what are those things?
Carbon credits.
Well, yeah, that, but also
plants,
alternative forms of energy and whatever. That's not necessarily.
What about trees? They reduce carbon dioxide.
Exactly. I mean, it's not necessarily clear that because you're fighting climate change that you're doing so in a charitable way. And same racial, ethnic, and religious reconciliation. That's all great, to try to achieve. But again, in a charitable way, what the hell does health security mean? I mean, it's just, this kind of stuff is just rubbish language.
Well,
and
it's
leadership,
exactly what I'm thinking, because I've produced videos of and sat through some of these presentations where people ramble off these type of buzzwords where I'm sitting there thinking, this sounds like nonsense.
Right, because it is nonsense. And then leadership development and citizen service, again, laudable ideas, but demonstrate to me how you have an actual formal legal organization that is engaging in these pursuits in a charitable fashion, not as a consulting service or a life coach or a religion or whatever. I mean, this is just rubbish. And some grown-up in BAD, if there are any in BAD, and I hope there are, should have looked at this and say, this is all great, Bill. When you're on the campaign trail, when Hillary wants to run for Senate again, she could throw in a sustainable, throw in a few other words
just
like that.
Just make sure you wear the tiger suit.
Wear that too, and whatever you want. But none of this... It's interesting stuff, but it's not authorized by the IRS on the basis of a valid application. And
I don't even think it's interesting. I think it reeks of buzzwords and fancy language that someone who's not paying that much attention sits in some auditorium and hears this presentation and leaves with this general sense that everything said sounded good.
Yeah, exactly. It's just and so then you down and below here. On the one hand, there have been no valid amendments of the Articles of Incorporation. That's a controlling legal document. We've given you the link before. Read it for yourselves. It's never been amended to expand its purposes to these ideas. But here's one we want to hit here. This is the Bernie Madoff sentencing file. This one down here. And I just was thinking about our friend Bernie, because it was about 10 years ago that the Bernie scandal came to light. And if we look here, remember we've shown for people the sentencing memo.
He's still eating prison burritos.
He will be doing that for the rest of his godforsaken life. But if we go slowly through this here, the fraud loss known to date, which is greater than $13 billion, is more than 32 times the baseline level of loss that would carry a sentence of life under the U.S. sentencing guidelines. 32 times. So in other words, call it $300 million.
They don't have enough burritos in the jail for that guy.
Well, call it $300 million of fraud. That's 1 year of the Clinton Foundation. Very close to the year we're going to now go into.
300 million fraud gets you life in prison?
Yeah. This is what this says under the U.S. sentencing guidelines written at the time. This is June 29th, 2009, or June 2009.
That's amazing.
And it says, look, he engaged in wholesale fraud for more than a generation, 20 years. His so-called investment advisory business was a fraud. Delete the word investment advisory, put in the word charity. His frauds affected thousands of investors. delete the word
investors,
thousands, put in
kids.
millions,
Yeah.
delete investors, put in donors, and he repeatedly lied under oath and filed false documents to conceal his fraud. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Lied repeatedly under oath and filed false documents to conceal his fraud, Mr. Hansen. Are you awake or are you sleeping now? Okay? The scope, duration, and nature of Madoff's crimes render him exceptionally deserving of the maximum punishment allowed by law. And the guidelines advise a sentence of 150 years.
Wow.
Okay?
I like the idea of leaving his dead bones in there for another like 70 years.
Well, that's, under the English law, the draconian English law, they had this really horrific sentence for the worst crimes. You were hanged, drawn, and quartered.
Wow.
And there what they would do to you is they would first hang you until you nearly died by your neck.
Oof.
And that would not be a pleasant experience. And you would actually be wishing for death. Then they would take your still living body and put it to the back of a cart and drag you through the streets of whatever place you lived in. And take London at the time, that was not cobblestones and filth in the streets.
Good.
Not good. And when you were basically, near death, that's when they would take your body and you cut your head off, and then they would take your corpse and cut it into squares.
Or they wouldn't chain you into the thing and leave you there rotting.
Well, even worse. And then what they would do, just to set an example, they would take the 4 pieces of your body and put it on the wall of the city, and so that the crows could feast on it, and they put your head on a pike. Okay, that's for you.
When did they stop doing that?
They stopped doing that in, I want to say, the 17th century, 18th century.
Someone was like, it's a bit excessive.
Exactly right. Elizabeth Warren is like, these are not our values.
Do we really want to do this?
But it's even worse than that. That takes the criminal. But beyond that, they would then say to the offspring of the criminal, you can't inherit property. You cannot be, your entire bloodline was doomed.
Wow.
So, that's sort of a punishment. I'm not in favor of that.
It's a deterrent.
But it certainly was a deterrent. Even then, you still had people who were, into the fraud. But, this gives you a sense. For only $13 billion, they're saying Madoff deserves to go to prison for 150 years. And this is in a for-profit-seeking guise.
That must have been in New York that they were trying that, right?
Definitely in New York. And so this is, for a for-profit fraud, they're saying 150 years in prison for only $13 billion. We're asserting that the fraud here could be $100 billion or more in an area of life where you're not supposed to be seeking a profit.
Wow.
So how Madoff's down there, whatever he's getting beaten up in prison, which I believe he's been beaten up a few times.
Madoff has?
Yeah, but he's probably sitting there saying, why am I in prison? Look what Hillary thought she'd be president.
Well, Charles, Robert Justice says bring back the pike. And then Jörg Fritz says you forgot castration.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget.
Yeah, it is.
Let's
move
forgotten.
on. Let's move on.org. So if we go into the next slide.
Yes.
Next page. All right. These are, this is like your simple report card, okay, for we numbers geeks, right? You got 2 things you got to produce with regard to 2009. You're producing that in 2010. If we go back...
Sorry,
it's okay.
I hit the wrong thing there.
That's all right. Jumpy fingers. Thinking about getting hanged, drawn, and quartered, or whatever.
No.
So on the one hand, you have the 990, which Doug White, who is an expert on charity, was correct to point out that a 990 is not a tax form, it's an informational return. You're not paying taxes, you're just filling out this thing under penalties of perjury concerning 2009. You submit that on the 15th of November, 2010. 5 days before then, BAD produces a purported audit, which I would argue is not a legally valid audit. So there's a 5-day interval, okay? In that 5-day interval, somehow they decide that the revenues should be lower by $3.6 million than BKD said, and that the program expenses should be lower by $3.2 million. Management general should be low. These are expenses that are lower are shown as green numbers because it's a lesser expense, so it's a positive thing. Revenues that are lower are a red item because more revenues, less cash. It's a negative thing. So you see you have management general off by $110,000, fundraising off by $271,000. You have total expenses $3.6 million down. There's a net difference of $7,316. And there shouldn't be a difference. That's the whole point of having an auditor. There should absolutely not be a difference here. Okay? And I look at this, and when I see in something where there shouldn't be a difference, multiple significant differences in a short period of time, right away I call bullshit.
Yeah.
And this has never been corrected. It should be corrected. One needs to understand why these differences occurred. Okay? And
no indication of why.
Right, and the simple question here is, if you're sitting there as top auditors, the ones I've dealt with on complex matters, they like to reduce issues very simply. You're sitting there in 2010. You got numbnuts Andrew Kessel, doesn't understand consolidation. You got who knows what Bruce Lindsay's really up to and what Bill and Hillary and Chelsea are up to. But you went out, you told people initially $100 million for a library. You finished that project in 2004-05 timeframe. And yet you're out here in 2009 raising $250 million. Why'd you need that money? You finished the library. It's in somebody else's problem, National Archives. You don't need another $250 million. You tell me nobody at BKD said, why are you raising this money?
I need it all in singles.
That's right. And so no one asked that obvious question, it would seem. And we go to the next. Remember, programs are the most important item, right? So if we go to the next page.
You just imagine Bill Clinton walking into Scores with a suitcase and making it rain.
Exactly, right. So we sit here and, to make things easier, maybe I'm sympathetic to people who are dyslexic and dysgraphic and have certain problems like that. Maybe Eric Hansen and the whole team at BKD, are all dyslexic and dysgraphic and they can't read.
But is that the type of thing that an accountant, it seems like you probably would be in some other profession.
Well, one would hope, maybe acting or something, but,
right. Painting or
right.
Singing.
But so here, we just go to these are excerpts from the annual report, which is a marketing document of the Clinton Foundation. It's just a puff piece. There's no legal rules on that one. But the biggest program expenses, they say it's $221.7 million was spent in this marketing puff piece. $173 million was the Clinton Health Access Initiative. Now, we take a big step. Let me help you out, Eric. Okay, the Clinton Health Access Initiative didn't exist on September 28th, 2009. So how did they spend $173 million on it? Okay, and you were involved writing an audit for the Clinton Health Access Initiative in 2011 concerning 2010, BKD was. And you, in reviewing that audit for 2010, you must have checked to see and found the missing application for federal tax exemption, which is found in the New York state site, that claimed with a straight face that the Clinton Health Access Initiative did not exist prior to September 29th, 2009. So how did they spend almost $15 million a month during all of 2009? What happened before September 29th, 2009? What happened after? Country by country by country. Why are you sure that 100% of the activities of the Clinton Health Access Initiative should flow into the Clinton Foundation website? You don't control 100% of the Clinton Health Access Initiative. You control a majority of the directors. Why did you take full credit for it in these financial statements? Okay, the Clinton Global Initiative, you said you spent $13.2 million on that in 2009, but you didn't even file for tax exemption until August of 2010. And by the way, it's a slush fund and it's not a charity anyway. Okay, this Clinton Climate Initiative, run by Ira Magaziner, it's not a legal entity. There's been no legal entity ever created called the Clinton Climate Initiative that I've been able to find that's a charity, that's a federally tax-exempt, lawfully organized and operated. But you claim another $12 million was spent on that.
But do they think that by calling it an initiative, that it's something that the charity is? It doesn't matter.
It's more evidence of purposefully engaging in deceitful behavior. You describe it as something that widows and orphans, and gullible political types would say,
initiative.
Oh, must be a charity.
Take the initiative.
Yeah, sounds good. Give it an acronym, even better.
Right.
CCI, got a ring to it,
Yeah.
And then, so the Clinton Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative, it's got that sustainable in there. It's probably got green stationery too, or at least green and whatever.
Leaves and things on it.
Yeah, but this is a Canadian entity that you, at best, control 50% of. So is $4.251 million, is that 50% of the action? Is it 100% of the action? Explain this is a Canadian operation. How come you say you don't have any control over Canadian bank accounts? What are the potential benefits that donors to the CGSGI may have derived personally? Those are potentially criminal under Canadian and U.S. law enormement. You cannot derive a private gain through the operation of a charity. So what about Bill's speeches and contributions and other
laureate
deals that came out of Canada?
Oh.
When he would go up to Toronto to have, in 2006, I think he went to Canada and Toronto, a big fundraiser up there. What about the many Canadian companies that have paid him and also paid Hillary and maybe paid Chelsea? You have to disclose all that in Canada, in the U.S., and of course they haven't done it. Same thing with this Clinton-Hunter Development Initiative, which is the first thing that we talked about. The first thing, one of the early things that we talked about was the Clinton-Hunter Development Initiative. Anyway,
the Children's
Investment Fund was another one, but we also did CHDI early, went over to Malawi and talked about all that. But that's not 100% control. It's based in Scotland. Same issue with foreign currency. Same issue with potential criminal enormement. Maggie Haberman's father-in-law is on the board of the Hunter Foundation.
Really?
Exactly, and of course she hasn't come clean on that.
Well, she's our girl who will write the story or whatever they say in the Podesta emails.
Right, exactly. She's our lady. But you look at this, and again, for maybe the people at BKD, it's a special group of people who can't do math, which would not figure well in a marketing exercise. But to help them out, I said, all right, what percentage of the total declared program expenses, the key number in a foundation's financial statements, what percentage were at face value unauthorized? And Jason, do you see that number kind of in the middle, that 93?
Wow.
You like 93, don't you?
93, well,
93% of the declared program expenses were for completely unauthorized activities in 2009. And nobody at BKD said, well, 93 is kind of a big number. That's like almost all of your program expenses are not authorized. And then just to make it really, straightforward that you're trying to conceal the truth from the public, the core program, the Presidential Library and the Research Center in Little Rock, you provide no information about its revenues and expenses, nothing. This Clinton Economic Opportunity Initiative, which I would facetiously argue is probably set up for the Clinton family, is certainly not a charity. This is that thing in Harlem that supposedly a retired consultant got together and was walking around Harlem trying to help, those small businesses.
Increase the value of the real estate.
Who knows, The Alliance for a Healthier Generation, they don't control 100% of that.
That's actually an interesting point. When the Clintons went to Harlem, that was a pretty, it's almost like if you did a survey of New York to find the most economically depressed neighborhood, Harlem might be it. And if you started moving your crap in there while the real estate is low, and said, hey, we're going to increase the property values, let's push out all the black people.
Yeah, well,
now you own buildings and stuff there. And
same thing happened in Little Rock, and they brag about it, frankly. And they brag about the fact, in this 2009 thing, they brag about the fact that $2 billion of economic value was created by citing the Clinton Library in this portion of, of Little Rock. So they shouldn't have taken 100% credit for this Alliance for a Healthier Generation. And then in addition to that, there are lots of subsidiaries around the world. I know of the UK, Bahamas, India, and South Africa. There are other ones. It's not clear that the results of those international operations were included in these consolidated results properly. So, this is really very comparable to Madoff and Enron. You're going out representing to the world that you have an investment fund in Madoff when it's not. It's just a fiction. It's an exercise to enrich the Madoff family. You spread the word about the great charitable work that you're doing, and next thing you know, gullible corporations and grasping people who want to be on the right side of Hillary Clinton start giving her speeches and book deals and Chelsea coloring book deals or whatever, honorary degrees and awards and directorships. But there's no element of truth to any of it. It's a complete fiction. And so this would be this exercise took me approximately 15 minutes to write this down and type it, maybe 20, okay? And now, how much time did BKD bill for its work concerning 2009? There's a line in the 990 that says accounting fees paid regarding 2009 were $407,903. How come nobody at BKD looked at this and said, hey, wait a minute, 93% of your activities, your declared activities, according to this this marketing brochure are for activities that are certainly not authorized in the Articles of Incorporation or by the IRS. So that means an overwhelming majority of your activity is fraudulent. But we're going to give you an audit because we're BKD, BAD. It's nuts. So go to the next page. All right, this is a little bit more fine detail. None of these numbers are on the Clinton Foundation website. They're purposefully hidden. They are on the New York State website, and I just compressed them because we didn't have enough room to put all the columns. But if we look at this foundation is not the Little Rock complex. It includes an entity, Clinton Global Initiative, that was not authorized as a charity. It includes Alliance for a Healthier Generation, not authorized. Who knows what else is in it? But it's at the upper end. If you take these numbers at face value, right, you look at them and they say, all right, we had total expenses of $38.6 million, of which direct programs, so that's the heart of it, where you're really following, in theory, the programs that are authorized. Jason, what is that number?
Where do we have that?
Direct programs.
$3 million?
$3.8 million.
Total expenses is 38, so it's
10%. So 9 times. We have overhead that's 9 times our direct expenses in this core operation.
Seems like you could trim some of that fat.
Yeah, you might be able to do that. And then everything else.
Could they at least go 50%?
Well, but everything else, you look at it, the direct programs, $95.2 million, the combined. Chai's direct program expenses are $89.3 million. Okay? It's certainly not authorized in all of 2009. That's $89 million divided by 12 is about $7.5 million a month. That's like $200,000 a day.
What are they spending it on?
Yeah, again, but the point is it wasn't authorized. And did nobody at BAD look at this and say, maybe I ought to check that? And then you look down the expense categories. Right? In the core thing, they spent $11.2 million on salaries, right? And a further $3.5 million.
How many people worked there?
About half. And then you take $3.5 million for professional and consulting fees.
No, but I mean, $11 million in salaries. How many people are?
I know, not many is the answer.
Yeah.
And then on events, how do people who for a full year make $11.2 million together, how do they decide that it makes any sense to spend $6.8 million
on outside
on events? That's the Clinton Global Initiative Party in New York, which wasn't authorized in 2009.
Well, but my question is, if you're paying all these smart people these huge salaries, why are you bringing in outside consultants?
Exactly. Well, this is just the way we get to the combined number. Then look at travel. Okay, how does a foundation that's supposed to that's a lot of Ubers in Little Rock.
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe they're buying armored vehicles and using them to go all around Little Rock. You can't spend $1.6 million in Little Rock on anything.
Jet fuel.
Yeah, I don't think so. And then riddle me this, Batman. I mean, how, with a Little Rock complex that you built at considerable expense that has a lot of spare space that you haven't given away yet, okay, why are you spending $2.1 million on occupancy? You don't need to do that. You have the building.
Yeah, isn't that rent?
Right, with extra, why are you paying rent to third parties for what kind of offices? In New York, Boston, around the world. Why are you doing that? It's not authorized. And then for all this, they're saying, we're going to count the money that we spend on salaries. That's 11.2. But then miscellaneous other bullshit, we're going to spend $4.4 million on other.
What about 750,000?
I know,
is that
supplies.
like whiteout and paper clips
I
for
guess.
750,000?
Or I don't know, dry cleaning bills or something.
The staples. Oh yeah, well the dry cleaning, that makes sense. It's very hard to get some of those stains out.
Right. So, but if we look then, that's for the main core operation, which is all wrong. That's at best this might have been authorized, some of it, okay, but everything else was not authorized. And we look for the combined total. They're saying that they spent $38 million on salaries. How do you spend $38.2 million on salaries and another $30.7 million on professional and consulting fees?
It's crazy.
And to who are those consulting fees
you
going?
You would think at $38 million you'd have the top people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of consulting. I mean, maybe they're using McKinsey.
Joking aside, though, isn't it a pretty common strategy if someone's putting together anything that either we're going to hire top people and keep all the talent here, or just hire the minimum number of people and then outsource to get the best talent from consultants?
In the for-profit world, you may try that, but in the not-for-profit world, you've got to control this thing tightly from a U.S. base. So the very idea that you're almost spending one for one, $38.2 million on salaries, and you're spending almost that much money on outside consultants to do what? And you're not listing them out. You know, who's consultant number one? Who's consultant? By chance, was one of those consultants Ira Magaziner? Right? And look at the travel expense for the whole thing. Again, this is supposed to be based in Little Rock, only Little Rock, $10.8 million in travel. And then look at other. How do you spend $38 million on salaries and $40 million on other?
That's a lot.
Right? And remember I said don't think about the $2.8 million of the Trump Foundation. Okay, that they're tagged for $2.8 million. Look at this is a shit show of numbers. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Any grown-up, you know, who had any experience and was presented with this kind of financial analysis,
it's absurd.
You would fire everybody in management in this thing with extreme prejudice, and you would probably go cap in hand to the Attorney General of Arkansas. Look, we screwed up. We have no clue how we got to this place. We're shutting the sucker down. National Archives has the books and records, has the complex. City of Little Rock's got some SWAT here. We'll make sure the public can still look at the books and records. But we are shutting this sucker down, which is what New York State is demanding the Trump Foundation do.
That's interesting.
On a lot smaller operation. So this is an issue that New York State has jurisdiction over. The Clinton Foundation, since 2001, July or thereabouts, has continuously operated in New York. They have failed to file their paperwork properly. They still haven't filed the 2016 stuff, 17 stuff properly in New York. They haven't corrected a lot of these different filings. We've had a lot of details we've talked about in the past. But it's crystal clear from their own filings for 2009 that the overwhelmingly biggest piece of the Clinton Foundation was this thing, CHI, which I would argue partially included something they called Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, and then from the 29th of September 2009 forward, something called Clinton Health Access Initiative, which is the classic thing that people look for when you have something that sounds sort of the same, two CHIs, you know, and you've got this record of filing false and materially misleading financial statements, and you've got a crappy asleep at the switch auditing firm still involved with this whole mess, and you've got trustees who are conflicted, you've got obvious mathematical and legal errors. This is just obvious that what they're doing here is it's a Ponzi scheme, right? And they were not trying to control this. This is reckless behavior, which needs to be severely punished. So what you're saying about the Trump thing, you know, acting attorney general, whatever your name is, you know, you need to multiply it by over 1,000. So we go to the next page. Now, we've talked about these chinos before, charities in name only. You know, those people who are interested in getting to the bottom of the magnitude, the full contours of this, we've left out things like the Global Fund and Unitate and some of these international operations. But if you look, the Clintons, their cronies, their allies have been engaged in a consistent pattern of racketeering and criminal behavior in the guise of multiple charities starting around October 23, 1997 to the present. And under Bill Clinton, it's easy to understand when he was president why nothing was done about it. Less clear, why did James Comey, why did Rat Rodenstein, why did Robert Mueller from 2001 to 2005 allow an investigation to proceed into the core Clinton Foundation that didn't find much of this early stuff? Why did they let it flourish afterwards? Why did Barack Obama allow this to flourish? Because I guess he wanted to emulate what the Clintons are doing.
Yeah,
and that could be well what he's doing now. But again, for those who say there are no details, you have to go in when you're operating using this employer identification number with all these other satellites. You're required under various laws to clearly explain in your filings what your organization actually consists of, and they've never done that. Even with the refilings on November 16th, 2015, they have never done this work properly. And now they're 12 days away from finishing this year. In theory, we learned from the two whistleblowers, the FBI is investigating it, and hopefully we're going to find out how they investigate things. There's a clear pattern, a clear record here. We've learned from the New York Attorney General that $2.8 million in charity fraud is a serious matter. We've learned from the Corinne Brown experience that $800,000 gets you federal prison for 5 years. Steve Stockman, $1 million gets you 10 years in a federal prison out of a Texas case. The first case was a Florida case. This is a New York case. And, you know, it's really important. And a lot of people need to put pressure in the crowd and elsewhere on the various persons who could do something about this, because if we allow this example to stand, the Obama Foundation will go even further down the rat hole of the Clinton Foundation, and we will run into a place before long where the system of law and order that we depend upon in this country will be gutted.
Yeah.
And we will descend into anarchy. So if you go to the next page.
We've got someone in our comments telling us that Obama's kids are now millionaires and wondering how such a thing could have happened.
Well, they're good savers.
But they're in college, aren't they?
I'm just teasing. They save their allowance money. Now, Thomas Paine, our mutual friend, one of the reasons that name is bandied about is this passage.
This is the Sir Thomas Paine, you mean, or Michael Moore?
There was no Sir Thomas Paine, but the one you're thinking of, yeah. This is something called The Crisis, which was written 1776, 23 December, so almost around the exact moment. These are the times that try men's souls. And here, when you look back in the way this is written, it's much longer than this, so I just excerpted some of the key phrases here. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. People who, I remember in college, I didn't do so well in my first history course, and so I said, it's not for me. Instead, I'll focus on politics and economics. But in my older age, really beginning in 2002, I started on my own to try to relearn history. And it's really amazing how smart some of these people were at the time, how far-sighted they were, and how much you can learn by trying to put yourself back in the minds of patriots, true American patriots, who at this point did not know whether they were going to win or lose. And I did mention hanged, drawn, and quartered. The penalty for taking on the king was being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Every single one of these patriots who made that decision to take up against the king and his governors, royal governors across then the American colonies, knew that the penalty for losing was far worse than mere death. It meant that their families would have everything taken away from them for all time. And yet I'm not suggesting here armed insurrection, by the way, for those who would like to make that argument against me. I'm merely saying that when people say, as that idiot AOC keeps saying, and others, things have never been worse in the United States than in 2018, get an effing grip. Go back and check this period across these what became these United States. Then for fun, think about the War of 1812 to 1814. You may not have learned that because you're spending too much time
taking personal days, or what did she do?
Personal care days, or maybe when you were in college you decided rather than study this, you might study, the American resident, I don't like to call them Indian, antecedents of the Constitution, that it was modeled on the Iroquois Confederation document or something. This, or maybe you're spending your time boning up on ancient aliens. But this stuff really deserves to be read in appropriate context. I'm not suggesting that everything about the founders was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but comes a moment when things that you might want to just spend time doing whatever are your pursuits. You might want to just cook up a nice meal for your family, take in a good movie. If you like sports, watch or play sports. That's all fine and good. But when the United States, the strongest market in the world, the biggest power in the world, still has this division that I think has been fomented by people in the Uniparty, both Republicans and Democrats, who want to see the masses distracted from the theft and corruption that's going on all around us. We are being taken to the cleaners by people in the deep state who are building these gigantic fortunes, who are stymieing the proper investigation of this fraud, and are trying to attack the very people who are closest to exposing the fraud for what it is. And so we could well go in, and I'm not advocating this, a financial panic. There are people, Ron Paul has been quoted recently saying that we face now conditions that he believes will be worse than the Great Depression of 29 to 33, and that could easily happen. We've had 10 years of excess, too much borrowing, too much spending, low interest rates, not attacking the real problem. I mean, you leave a curable disease untreated for 10 years.
Right.
And
it gets bad.
It can get badly bad. So I'm not sure I was quite finished
Oh,
with that.
sorry.
That's okay. So we have seen on this continent through history a fair-minded reading of history, especially going as far back as you care to go. We have seen far more daunting challenges than currently exist. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about the present state of affairs. Depending on which way the balls bounce here, President Trump, I've noticed right before we went on air, began to draw the comparison to the way the New York Attorney Generals have been going after his foundation, but leaving the Clinton Foundation alone. And it's high time for the president to stand up and make that point. As I say, it is certainly wrong for anyone to obstruct justice, but that's precisely what the Clintons have done in looking at this email investigation, looking at the Clinton Foundation, looking at Benghazi, looking at the long record of corruption. That's exactly what they specialize in, obstructing justice. There's nothing wrong with the people who put Donald Trump in power, be they Republicans, Democrats, or non-aligned, obstructing injustice. And that's what we need. That's I think, if we had a hallmark of what we're doing. We are trying to obstruct injustice. And injustice is being carried out daily. Strangely, at a time when Donald Trump is actually the elected president of the United States.
So it's very strange, Charles.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Strange.
How could that be happening?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. So with that, I think we've pretty much taken people through the core of the presentation. Now you could go back to the art department's latest masterpiece.
Well, I just sometimes drop it on that so that, when I cut to this shot of you and I, it's when his words there, it's difficult to read. But that was, Charles, I really do hope that Donald Trump can rise above this and do something. It's like this criminal justice reform that passed today. I mean, he does seem to be doing some incredibly good things that other presidents were not effective at getting done. And I feel like all of this investigation into nothing, and there are people who are saying like, oh no, we have a right to investigate everything until we find. That's not the way it works, that you just investigate people into. If he's done crimes with this Trump Foundation, sure, that needs to be investigated and brought to light and brought to justice. Is it criminal? And if they're going to charge him with criminal acts in that, we do need an explanation from the charging body as to why the same thing isn't being done. It's just proof then of a selective justice system, which is not justice.
Right, and that can't really work. When you think it through clearly,
no. Selective
justice empowers the regulators to sit above the people.
Right.
And that is not a system...
Super dangerous.
Anybody, any thinking person should be resisting that, not violently, but resisting it peaceably, to the fullest of their abilities, because especially when you think through a scenario where the technological tools become ever more capable of scanning your daily lives, of finding out all about your movements, of even to some extent influencing, controlling your movements. If you envisage a regulatory state with unchecked new powers, is that an unelected regulatory state? Is that really what we want in this country? I don't think so.
Well, that's what we've got.
Well, I'm not sure it's as bad as it could be. We start having the next level will be to say, well, Jason or Charles, you're the type of person, by your profile, I know that you're about to commit a crime, so I'm going to jail you in advance, that kind of stuff. We don't want to go in that area any further down the road than we've already been. So we've been living this Falsman or Truman show. I don't know that we can count on Eric Hansen ever to wake up. I think his behavior so far is shown that he is just very happy as a clam in all these conflicted positions. He's hoping that this mess will go away and he can spend time watching football, playing with his stuffed animals. But if he were, we gave him a chance. He could have been a man for all seasons. He could have stood up. He hasn't done it. No. And BKD hasn't done it. And I think BKD could face here a fate they, at this point, truly deserve. The good people in BKD, if there are any left in management, you need to turf out Hansen and his other people. You need to make amends, seek a bargain, and renounce these fraudulent financial statements that are at the core of the Clinton Foundation.
He's on the air, and he's unaware, Charles.
I think that's true.
Well, Charles, thank you for another excellent presentation. I want to remind everybody that Crowdsource the Truth is viewer supported, so please become a sponsor at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or go to paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. In the month of December, sponsors at the $10 per month level, or even if you send a one-time sponsorship of $10 to PayPal, you're going to receive a free Sunday with Charles screensaver. So that's a benefit you can get right away. And Charles, I'll see you on Sunday for another episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.